Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Physical Education Podcast in, I think, about a year now. If you had been listening before, then I stopped. I just didn't have the time to be producing content, and I was going to take a break from this, and I didn't intend to be back to producing content by now, but the whole COVID thing, the whole lockdown, the Bill Gates scamdemic, or whatever you want to call it, or whatever you believe, all that happened, and basically there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment that's very, very, very interesting, and I think it draws a lot of parallels with ultimately what I think is the underpinning issue when it comes to dealing with chronic pain. And I'll get to that in this episode. But today what I wanted to talk about is basically an audio version of my most recent newsletter, series of newsletters where I was discussing managing stress. Because ultimately chronic pain can only occur where there is chronic stress. And it seems that nowadays everything is particularly divisive and particularly contentious. Now, a lot of these things have been ramping up for a number of years now, but it seems to be getting worse. Maybe I have a warped idea of what things are, but as far as I can tell, things are getting particularly divisive, and especially now with the lockdowns and with the pandemic, the global pandemic, and people being divided over what is an appropriate response, what needs to be done, has this all been blown out of proportion, or is this all being done in good faith? I won't cover that in detail today, or I won't cover my opinion on that in detail today, but basically things are tremendously divisive now, and I've noticed a lot of tension, particularly certainly in myself, but with this sort of inability to voice differing opinions, and it causes a lot of stress. I'm seeing it in myself, I'm seeing it in a lot of people, and the key issue that underpins this is something we need to understand for chronic pain. So let's get into it. So today I'm going to discuss some key concepts, some strategies, and some food for thought to help you understand how to have sort of productive discussions, and how to not feel like you're against the world, or someone who has a slightly different viewpoint, or someone who votes for someone different, or someone who, is part of a different team. How to kind of realize that they're not actually your mortal enemy, which seems to be where the direction in which things devolve. You're on the blue team, they're on the red team, therefore they're an evil person, and there's more and more of that. So let's sort of talk through that and discuss some food for thought and strategy. So what I see a lot is that people argue over two sides. It could be anything. It could be Republican versus Democrat. It could be your party versus that party. It could be capitalism versus socialism. It could be free healthcare versus private healthcare. It could be whatever the latest social cause is. There's always some sort of thing that people are divided about. And I think people need to grasp that in most of these cases, we're actually on the same side. And the way the simplest way I think of explaining this is, if you can imagine a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, there is your common goal. There's the thing that we're all actually looking for. I think most people, there are bad people in the world, but most people, I think, are good, or they mean well, or they kind of, are apathetic, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They just, want to get on with their lives, and they don't wish harm on others. Most people want good things. They want to be healthy. They want others to be healthy, even if it means, that they're left alone. I want you to be healthy so that you leave me alone. Whatever it is, the point is, very few people actually wish bad things on others. So no matter what the social cause is, or whatever the political ideology is, generally we ultimately want the same thing. So we agree on the peak of that pyramid. We have that common goal, but we disagree about the means by which to achieve that goal. So, that could be capitalism versus socialism if we're going to be, really paint with broad strokes and oversimplify things, which is what a lot of these things are. It's just oversimplification of complex issues, and you end up on one side versus the other side. So in most cases, you're going to find that you actually want the same things. I want people to be healthy. I want people to be happy. And the example I use in the newsletters, I talk about the whole kind of debate over universal free healthcare versus privatizing healthcare. And I think people who believe in, and I certainly used to be on this side. I used to think, yeah, healthcare, everyone should have it. It should be free to everyone. And on the surface, that's a very nice thought, and how can you argue with that? But it's down to the practicalities of it. Increasingly, I disagree with this idea, and I won't get into the specifics now, but my experience is that people do not value their health. They really don't. It's a tough thing to kind of grasp, particularly when you're in a caring profession and where your job is to care for people and to help people. I've learned kind of the hard way that people generally don't truly care about their health. And there's something about getting health for free, getting interventions for free, that seems to just completely devalue the intervention. And so like I said, I want people to be healthy. I care tremendously about people's health. I want people to be happy. All I do is share information to help people be healthier. That's what I do, and most of what I do is for free and is free advice. So I want these things for people, but the reality is, the human psychology of it is, the harsh truth is that people don't act on that. And the way you resolve health issues, I would argue, is by making people have to be responsible for their health. So if you're going to have to pay for whatever it is 20 years down the line, a heart attack or whatever, the way you combat that and you make sure that these health issues don't become so prevalent is by teaching people and encouraging people and making it the bottom line that they have to take care of it themselves, because no one is going to take care of it for them. And no one can, and that's the complexity of health, is that it's so tremendously individual that it's almost impossible for you to get the adequate level of care if you're going to entirely outsource your health. I've yet to see a complex chronic health issue that could be resolved entirely by you completely outsourcing the problem and saying, look, I put myself in the hands of the experts and they're going to fix me. No one's going to fix you, even if it's some sort of physical thing that needs to be fixed. The surrounding parts of that, the supportive elements of that you need to undertake, no one can do for you. And the bottom line, and it's a really challenging thing to kind of grasp, because when you start talking about these things and saying, look, you need to pay for your own healthcare, or that's the thing, is that you need to pay for your healthcare. Ideally, you need to be living in such a way that you wouldn't really have any healthcare costs. Your healthcare costs are the money that you spend on food and healthy activities and a healthy life. So there's that element of it too. But when you start talking about these things, it can seem really callous, and it can seem like, oh, why don't you care about these people? And again, it's not caring. It's just that at some point you need to recognize that this is reality, and we can ignore reality, or we can just kind of get on with it and accept reality. It's the distinction between being nice and being kind. And I think a lot of people don't understand the distinction, and they can get kind of stuck in being nice, rather than being kind. And the kind of example I would use for that is if you think of the likes of the X Factor or the America's Got Talent or Britain's Got Talent, where you've got people who come and they sing and they show off their singing ability. And in the early stages of their shows, there's always some tragic audition of someone who's completely tone deaf and just does not realize it, and they're convinced that they're a star and that they're going to do great things with their voice. And you could imagine that in some cases, people have been nice to them, but it hasn't been kind. So saying to a person who clearly has no ability to sing that, oh, you have a great voice, you should go for this competition, you should put yourself out there, and not encourage them to get better. So it's one thing to say, give it a go, but to kind of tell them, look, your voice is great, when it clearly isn't, might feel like the nice thing to do. You don't want to be mean. You don't want to tell them that they're tone deaf and that they need to either give up this dream, or they need to work hard at it. And I would say, tell them, it's easier said than done, but encourage someone to work on it. Don't necessarily tell them to close the door on that dream, but that would be the nice thing to do. And we were kind of encouraged to be nice and to do the nice thing. And I totally get this. This is something I really struggle with, and this is why I feel so strongly about this, because I totally see that side of things. I totally see the free healthcare side of things, and that's kind of what my heart might say to me, this is the right thing. But what experience and pragmatism tells me is that it just doesn't make sense. And so at some point, rather than just being nice and telling the delusional tone deaf person to go for it, is no longer nice. It's an unkind thing to do. The kind thing to do, and you don't have to be mean about this, but the kind thing to do is to say, look, it's great that you're passionate about this, but you're not there yet. You need to practice this. This is a skill. This is something you need to hone, and this is something that you need to take seriously. And look, if you go in front of an audience and you start singing like this, chances are it's not going to go well, because quite honestly, your voice isn't there. It's the same way if someone kicks a football every now and then and isn't really that good, and they're saying that they want to go trial for the national team, and you would say to them, look, you're not there. You don't have the skills. And that's the kind thing to do, and you don't have to be mean when you do that. Whereas the nice thing, but arguably the cowardly thing to do in that instance, is to say, oh yeah, brilliant, yeah, you're really good, yeah, go for it. And then they will be ridiculed. So as this pertains to health, the nice thing might be to, someone who has poor health, poor habits, is to just, not call them up on it. And when they have a health issue, be like, oh, how unfortunate, some people are just unlucky. And the truth is, in a lot of these cases, particularly, chronic health issues, obviously there are accidents, there are things that happen that are unfortunate, that are just bad luck. But, chronic health issues, the things that we spend most of our money on in the healthcare system, are totally preventable. And the kind thing to do, as much as it's harder, is to say, look, this ultimately is your fault. And you wouldn't necessarily say it in that way, but you would make it clear to someone, look, your health is your own. And if you keep living this way, if you keep eating this way, if you keep acting this way, this is what's going to happen. And that's the bottom line. And, that is the kind thing to do. So it's really important to understand that. I think generally, particularly politically, that's where the division is. It's kind of, one side is more give a man a fish, the other side is more teach a man to fish. And there are all sorts of complexities of, we need the resources to teach someone, or maybe someone is in such a low point that they're in no place to be taught this and they need to just be given something. And that's where all the nuance lies. But if we can understand, going back to the original analogy of the pyramid, and the peak of the pyramid is the common goal. If we can understand that we actually want the same things. I want you to be healthy. I want people to be healthy. But I don't want to give you health care for, a heart attack that's 30 years in the making. I don't want to give you that for free just because it's actually an unkind thing to do. It might be the nice thing to do, but it's an unkind and ultimately cowardly thing to do, is to, make you feel justified in 30 years of bad actions. And again, you don't have to be mean about it, but the truth is the truth. And at some point we need to accept that and work with that rather than against it. So I think in most cases people want the same thing, but they get caught up in, the bottom portion of it. So the pyramid, you have the peak, and then you have at the bottom of it, if you look at it, it would be a triangle. The 2 points at the bottom at opposite ends, they're right versus left. They're Republican versus Democrat. They're Trump versus Biden. They're, Coke versus Pepsi or whatever it is. And we get caught up in that. So again, if we can identify the common goal and realize that most people are actually good people, they could be completely mistaken. They could have a completely warped idea about what to do, and that's why you think they're wrong. But if we can get to the humanity of it and say, okay, look, you actually want good things for people. This could be done capitalism versus socialism. You might completely agree and people will argue to the death over this. But ultimately, no matter what side you're on, people believe, well, this way is going to get me to, happiness, to a fair life, to a good life, to opportunity, to whatever it is. Now, once we understand that, so suppose you're in a position where there is someone who's close to you or just a random person and they agree, they're on the blue team, you're on the red team, they're Coke, you're Pepsi, whatever it is. We need to understand as well that just because there are different ways of doing things doesn't mean that those different means are equal. So the analogy I'd use for that would be, suppose you've got Mount Everest and you've got the peak, the summit of Mount Everest is the common goal. But on one hand, you've got this person who believes a route via the North Face is the best route, and someone on the other side who believes, no, this route via the South Face is the better option. Now, they have a common goal, but one of those means is likely going to be better than the other. Nowadays, we can establish that quite easily because Mount Everest has been climbed thousands of times, but it may not be clear what the perfect way to do this is, but we need to understand that there is a better way to do it, a safer way to do it. So again, it could be, capitalism versus socialism, or my political party versus your political party. And I think the free healthcare versus the private healthcare, I think, is a good example, because someone could say, look, if it's free, then it's always going to be, it'll be there. And, if a person needs it, they can have it. And yes, on the surface, that makes perfect sense. But again, you bring in the nuance, the reality of it, the human psychology of it, and you realize that there are other consequences. So if people feel like the choices in their lives with regards to their health have no consequences, and they feel like there's always going to be this free safety net, which of course we understand isn't free, because whether we pay for it at the time that we need it or we pay for it beforehand in taxes, we're going to pay for it in some way. So if you feel like none of these things really have any consequences, you're not incentivized to pursue good health, because you're like, oh, that's going to be taken care of. I'll just keep eating cheeseburgers, and if 30 years down the road I drop to the ground of a heart attack, it's grand. My health is going to be taken care of. I don't need to worry about that. And the cost of that I would argue is likely going to be far greater, because you're going to have a population that is not incentivized to look after their health and to be in charge of their health and to be the number one expert ultimately of their health. And what is the cost of that? You have people who, you have basically a need for more procedures. You have a need for more healthcare. Whereas if people are active in their health, suddenly, they don't have these random heart attacks that were, I never saw it coming. So we need to understand that we need to kind of separate the kind of good intentions and the being nice and this kind of simplistic view of things. Well, we want health, therefore free health. We need to understand that there may be negative consequences, and maybe there isn't a perfect solution because of the reality of 7 billion people on the planet who have different values, who have different cultures, and it's unlikely that we're going to have a single solution that works for everyone. But we can still identify the least wrong solution, or the most accurate solution, the better solution. So again, if we can keep this common goal in mind and humanize the other side and realize, and maybe the other side is just a bad person, and they'll tell you straight out, you'll say, look, ultimately, what do you want? Do you want people to be healthy? Do you want that? And if this person says, no, I actually want death to all people, then you can say, okay, yeah, fair enough. This is a bad person. And we're not going to get anywhere in this instance. But I've never actually met anyone who believes that. Even people who do pretty radical things, and who are, in some ways you would call them bad people. If you really get down to it, they just have a really warped idea of how to achieve something, but what they want to achieve is good. So if you can identify that, you can humanize them, and we can have a bit of a productive discussion rather than saying, Coke sucks, Pepsi for life, which is of course ridiculous because Coke is clearly better. But anyway, so that's kind of the main thing, the main way to kind of frame things. If you think of this pyramid, or if you think of this mountain, and everyone wants to reach the peak, the summit, the common goal, but they all differ when it comes to the means by which to achieve that. And if you can recognize that, you can humanize people and you can have a productive discussion. But what tends to happen is people are pitted against each other at the bottom of the pyramid, at the bottom of the mountain. Your Norther versus Souther, your Pepsi versus Coke, your chiropractic versus physio, your allopathic medicine versus Chinese medicine, whatever it is. And we start arguing over stupid things, and we turn against each other. So that's the main thing to kind of bear in mind. The second exercise, this is more of a simple practical exercise that you can try. And it's I actually learned this from a druid called John Michael Greer. He's an American druid. You probably don't hear about druids that often. Very interesting man. But he was on a podcast that I listened to, and he outlined this really simple strategy, and it's called find the third option. So when you're presented with any kind of binary in life, whether it's on the news or whether it's whatever it is, they're everywhere. It's Coke versus Pepsi, it's left versus right, capitalism, socialism. Find the third option. So when the news and the media is trying to divide you and trying to reinforce some level of division, find a third option, whatever that is. So if it's Republican versus Democrat, find the independent, find the libertarian, find the Green Party, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be something that you agree with or something that is better, but it's initially just about kind of snapping yourself out of that us versus them. So find the third option. What you'll notice is that as you begin to find third options, you'll find a fourth, you'll find a fifth, a sixth option, and you'll realize that these things are actually complex. Again, if you think of not just the pyramid, but you think of the Mount Everest summit, you have the common goal, but you have essentially infinite amounts of ways to ascend that mountain. So different starting points and then different routes between that starting point and the end point. So there are, millions and billions and infinite ways of doing something. Again, they're not all equal. There's probably going to be one or a group of them that are better than others. I would argue that that's probably always going to be the case. I don't think this is a matter of, your truth and, it's all subjective. I think we need to be grounded in objective reality and the truth. But you'll notice that there are nuanced ways and multiple ways of perceiving things and of achieving things. And if you can recognize that, you can kind of snap yourself out of this us versus them, left versus right, blue versus red, whatever it is. So yeah, that's a simple practical thing to do. So the kind of next thing I want to discuss is it's stepping out of the emotion. With all of these things, you've likely heard the term triggered, being triggered, something that triggers you. It's something that's probably in the last 10 years has become, maybe a bit less, but come to be in common parlance. And you'll see this particularly in political discussions. When Donald Trump was elected, there were videos of people who were unhappy about his election being triggered. And essentially, and it's not limited to people like that. It's everyone and anyone can be triggered by something. It's basically some sort of irrational response to something. And what that is going to be dependent on your upbringing, on your values, on your past experiences. So it could be that you see Donald Trump and he's the president and now you're panicking and you're outraged and you feel like the world is ending. Similarly, it could be that, some person is saying, we're going to get rid of the guns, and you're a patriotic American and you're panicking and you're worried and this, and then it could be that it could be anything. It could be Coke versus Pepsi. It could be Metallica versus Megadeth. We all have things. We all have teams that we're part of to some degree or another, whether, it's just we're a casual viewer of this team, or we are a diehard, wear the jersey every day, kind of know all the players' names and know the history. Whatever it is, we all have teams. We all have natural inclinations, and that's fine. But the point is, we can all be triggered by different things. And what I want to encourage you to do is to kind of recognize that emotion that comes with, the triggering, and recognize that you can kind of step out of that. Because when these things happen, you tend to go on autopilot and you tend to react, and it's all knee-jerk and it's all emotionally driven. And you need to ask yourself whether, this is a simple way to put it, whether you are having your thoughts or are your thoughts having you. So when you're triggered, when you're outraged about something, generally speaking, it's more like your thoughts are having you. So this emotion is driving you and it's controlling you and it's clouding your vision. It's preventing you from seeing the nuance and seeing the multiple options. You're sort of cemented into your left versus right, your us versus them, your whatever simple binary view of the world. So it is possible to kind of step out of that emotion and just kind of visualize this idea that you are this independent, sovereign being and you can think about whatever you want to think about. You can choose to have certain thoughts. You can choose to ignore or avoid other thoughts, and ultimately you're in the driver's seat. That's the bottom line. As much as it might not feel like it, you are in the driver's seat. And if you can imagine this cloud of emotion coming over you, and during that triggering experience, and perhaps making an effort to recognize that and step outside of it, and perhaps, step outside and observe it from the outside. So take a bird's eye view and say, okay, I'm feeling this, and where's that coming from, and why do I feel that? And if I take a step back, I can recognize these other nuances. I can find that third option, that fourth option, that fifth option. I can recognize the common goal. So the person or the thing that has triggered me, I can recognize, actually, they have a common goal, but they just feel like it needs to be achieved via this, seemingly opposite means of this means of action. So make an effort to recognize these triggering moments, these moments of intense emotion that seem to kind of overcome you, and see, can you step outside? Can you observe with a bird's eye view or from the side or from multiple angles and make sense of it? And it can be easier said than done. It's something that needs to be practiced, something that becomes easier with practice, and it might be something that initially you can only do after the fact. So it might be that one day you have this, triggering event, this interaction, and it's only later that day when you've calmed down and you've cooled down, or the next day, and you can look back over it and begin to parse things out and make sense of it with a bit more logic and calm and clarity. But the point is, make the effort to do that, no matter whether you need to take a week after the fact or you can do it immediately as it's happening. Just practice that and it will become easier, and you'll find that you're able to, ultimately the goal with this is to be in a position where you can be in a discussion about pretty much anything and remain totally in charge of your reactions to it. And that could be something really disgusting and abhorrent, and you can remain present and challenge the person and say, okay, so why do you think that? What ultimately are you trying to achieve with this? Why do you think this is right? Even if it's something that you completely disagree with. And that doesn't mean that you need to agree with them. It doesn't mean that you need to validate their ideas, but for your own sake, because if you start getting outraged and annoyed, the only person you're likely to harm is yourself. You're probably not going to change their minds. So having that clarity, having that ability to remain calm and say, okay, so why do you think that? Here's what I think, and here's why I think this is better. Can we agree on a common goal? Can we agree that we actually want the same things? And you'll find that you're going to have, first of all, much better interactions that don't affect you beyond that interaction, that don't negatively affect you beyond that. And you'll find that you're more likely to change someone's mind, because if you just start shouting at someone and accusing them of being wrong or being evil or being bad, they're unlikely to respond to that. They're unlikely to change their minds. Same way with silencing, and that gets into the argument of the importance of freedom of speech. Even if someone says something awful and disgusting, it's only by allowing them to express that and sort of get that idea out in the open that then you can pick it apart and they can be shown for a fool or a bad person, if in fact that's what they are. But if you just silence someone, if you just shout at them, they're just going to feel more justified and more dug into their position. So this is as much for you, for your own well-being and your own ability to navigate the challenges of life, as it is to actually create some sort of better outcome in the world. Because I think ultimately, and I'll get to this as we wrap up at the end, but I think we need to elevate our way of thinking and our way of discourse, and we can only do that at an individual level, rather than, it seems like we're being divided more and more, and we're not actually getting anywhere. So consider, the act of stepping outside of the emotion, asking yourself whether you are having your thoughts, so you're in control, you're in the driver's seat, or your thoughts are having you. They're overcoming you and they're controlling you, and preventing you from seeing clearly. Now, let me check my notes. Yeah, so if we go back to this kind of visual of the pyramid, so we have, the left versus right. We recognize the common goal at the top. But it's easy and it's sort of preferable. It's more comforting to be on one side, to be left, to be versus, right, to be libertarian, to be this, to be socialist, to be capitalist, to whatever it is. It's easier to be in that, to have that identity within that. And what I'm encouraging you to do is to inhabit this position of uncertainty, this position of, I don't belong to any specific ideology. I'm not this team or that team. I don't always vote for this political party. I don't always, unless, there are certain things that I feel like you should always stand for: truth, justice, things like that. But not teams, not these arbitrary things that are created that, tend to divide us. So I'm encouraging you to be willing and just accept this position of uncertainty. And it is much more challenging, and I'll explain why in the next kind of portion. But we need to be able to, I think the simplest way to kind of think about this is, and how I've kind of come to this point, is that I'm sort of, I'm blown away by the amount of times my mind has been changed or I've been shown to be wrong. So as I've learned about, all of this ultimately has been driven, so everything I talk about and where I am in life has been driven by my own health issues. And in the process of dealing with and overcoming my health issues over most of my life, between the ages of 9 and now I'm 31, most of my life has been influenced by having a chronic health issue, or wanting to understand, having overcome that, wanting to understand and wanting to help people with similar issues. So that's what's been driving, most of my life. And I've constantly changed my mind. I've constantly learned something new that has made me completely change my perspective on things. And I've gotten to the point where I'm like tremendously cautious about planting my flag around any sort of topic. There are very few things that I unequivocally stand behind or cheer for, aside from things like always searching for the truth. So that's what ultimately drives me, and I think it's what ultimately should drive you, is a search for the truth. And that's how you will get out of pain, by searching for the truth being, the solution, the accurate and ultimate solution to your problem. So I've always had my mind changed because I've had one view of the world where I had a health issue, and you just go to the doctor and you realize, this isn't helping, and in fact it might be making things worse, and the medication that I've been put on was actually taken off the market years later because tens of thousands, by conservative estimates, of people were killed by this, and this was known. The dangers were known before they released the drugs, but they just suppressed the evidence. This is in relation to the drug Vioxx, which is an anti-inflammatory that I was on as a child to deal with my Lyme's disease. So you're confronted with these things that are in opposition with your view of the world. So when you're a child, or when you're, most people will just kind of assume the authority and accept the authority of medicine and the medical system and modern Western medicine. And then you have experiences that challenge that. So you can either be blind to that, or you can change your mind. So you can either be dug into, Western medicine is the greatest thing ever, versus, traditional alternative medicine is the best, and being able to inhabit this place of uncertainty and saying, okay, this is a shock to my worldview. And if I'm going to grow from this, I need to inhabit this place of uncertainty and accept that things aren't as simple as I have been led to believe. And this happened to me repeatedly, over and over again. I spent years, I'd study this, I'd be like, oh, you know, I need to study this course, this is the next best thing, I'm going to do it, I'm going to commit myself to that. And then you do it, and then you start seeing problems, you start seeing chinks in the armor, you start seeing little flaws, and you're kind of like, you know, oh, we'll see, I'll give it a chance, I'll keep studying, put it to the test, and eventually it doesn't turn out to be what you thought. And again, you need to inhabit that place of uncertainty and be like, okay, I need to change my worldview. I need to step back into this place of, you know, what is the truth? And so inhabiting, like I said, this happened to me repeatedly to the point where now I'm like, I don't know what to believe. There are certain things that I feel are fairly concrete that I'll stand by, but I'm willing and ready to change my mind as much as necessary, because all I'm interested in is the truth, which is, you know, to say a true and lasting solution to chronic pain, which is why I really have a problem with the whole physiotherapy versus chiropractic versus osteopathy versus acupuncture. I really dislike this idea of limiting, you know, what I do as a practitioner, or what this idea of legitimizing limits on what practitioners are and can do. I feel like what you should be interested in is treating pain. That's what I'm interested in. I want to treat pain. If that means I need to use acupuncture needles, cool, I'll learn about that. If it means I need to learn nutrition, okay, I'll do that. If it means I need to crack spines with, you know, chiropractic adjustments, cool, I'll do that. I don't care. It doesn't matter. The goal, the summit that we should all be trying to attain is the treatment of pain. It shouldn't be, well, I want to be a physio, you know, so I'm going to do what physios do. And, you know, the moment someone with a problem, their problem falls just outside of my sphere of understanding, I'm just going to say, oh, well, I guess that's not for me. I guess, you know, they got to go to someone else. I feel like that's not good enough. It's just, you know, if you do that, or if you are a person in pain and you draw a line and you say, no, I don't do that kind of stuff. You know, for me, it's Western medicine. I go to the doctor, you know, I don't mess with any of that other stuff. If you draw a line there, like, what are you really trying to do? Or do you actually want to be out of pain, or do you only want to be out of pain to the degree that it doesn't threaten your worldview? Which is a bigger topic that I'll discuss in another video. But, long story short, we need to be able to step into this position of uncertainty and say, okay, maybe I'm wrong, or here are the times that I have been wrong, so perhaps I'm wrong again. So when I start to see evidence that I might be wrong, or I start to see things a bit differently, now that I'm open to seeing things differently, then I need to be able to change my mind and just start from this new perspective. And one of the reasons why it's very hard to do this is because it's physically more demanding. So if you think of it this way, running a marathon, running a 10K race isn't as physically demanding as running an ultramarathon, or running a triathlon, or performing a triathlon, running, swimming, cycling. And that's essentially what we need to do. We can be dug into this idea of, you know, left versus right. You know, I'm a Republican, I've always been a Republican, I'll always vote Republican, you know, till I die. That's just a very, you know, that's like the bare minimum amount of thinking. And this isn't about Republican, it's about whatever the team that you've selected, or whatever the worldview that you've selected. That's sort of the energetic equivalent of, the 100-meter jog versus the ultramarathon. In order to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of various worldviews, and being able to change your mind and being able to say, oh, actually, it turns out I was wrong for all these years I was wrong. For all these years I was doing the wrong thing, and I was actually maybe making my health worse, or I was becoming a worse person, or whatever it is, or I was just having a wrong perspective or inaccurate perspective. Being able to recognize that and course correct and readjust towards the truth is extremely energy demanding. It requires effort to think, and the more elaborate you're thinking, and the more you are, again, separating from the idea or the emotion and looking at it from multiple angles and discussing different things, the more you do that, the more energy it requires. So again, it's like the distinction between a 10K race and an ultra triathlon, for example. So it's not just more demanding, but it's more skills. So you're not just running, now you're swimming, now you're cycling. It's more energetically demanding, but it requires more skills. So like I said, there's kind of various elements to this. There is the energetic component, where we need the energy to see things differently, to consider things differently, and to do better things. But we also need the skills, the critical thinking skills that we can learn, that anyone can learn, to see things differently. So we need to attack this from different angles. So when we're stuck in this kind of left versus right, Pepsi versus Coke, Megadeth versus Metallica, socialism versus capitalism, chiropractic versus physiotherapy, whatever it is, excuse me, it's this very kind of easy way of doing things. We're not expending much energy. We have our mind made up, and we're sticking to that. And, I'm a diehard Republican, whatever it is. And that's just the easy way out. And it's not good enough, because nothing changes as long as people are in that position, as long as people think that way. We need to elevate the way that we think. We need to elevate the way that we think, in the same way that we need to elevate the way we think about our health. We need to recognize where things might be wrong. We need to recognize that, okay, something isn't working. Maybe I need to try this. Maybe I need to try that. Maybe I need to take more responsibility. All of these things require a lot more energy. So the same way that lifting 5 kilos once requires a certain amount of energy, lifting 500 kilos 10 times requires tons more energy, because there's more effort, and there is more effort in viewing the world with nuance. There's more skill with viewing the world with nuance and considering multiple perspectives and being willing to change your mind. So we need to address this at an energetic level. And this kind of brings us to sort of the final point, which is one that very, very few people talk about. I'm certainly not the only one, and I haven't invented this. I've learned from far more intelligent and informed people and experienced people, but not many people talk about this, particularly in the world of pain. And it's this issue of energy balance, because I see a lot of people who are doing all the right things. I've worked with a number of people who they got the fact that they needed to take control. They were there, they were ready, they were committed. If you told them what to do, you said, okay, do this mobility program. They did it. Like, they're tremendously dedicated, but they weren't getting better. And the reason for that is because, in a lot of cases, is because the body doesn't have the energy to do that, or the capacity to use energy properly. So let me kind of explain this in very simple terms. Everything you do has a cost, whether it's thinking, whether it's moving, whether it's eating, whether it's talking, whether it's lifting up things, doing, physical exercise, demanding exercise. All of it has an energetic cost. Simply being alive expends a certain amount of calories. So we understand that. We don't tend to think about that. We tend to only think about calories in the context of diet and weight loss. And so we have, I think, a bit of a warped idea about how many calories we need. But simply being alive requires calories. It requires energy. So we need to understand that we need to be putting, first of all, enough into the body. And the analogy I've used before is that you have vital systems in your body, your heart, brain, lungs, things that are needed for your immediate survival. So suppose every month you get €1,000 paycheck, and the cost of running your heart, brain and lungs comes to €1,000. Now, that's not enough. You want to be able to do other things. You want your kidneys, your liver, your reproductive organs, your digestive organs, you want those to work as well. But that's going to cost as well. So as long as you only have €1,000 coming in, you're not going to be able to do everything. You're not going to be able to do everything fully. What will tend to happen is not that you'll shut off those other things, is you will redistribute things. So you'll still prioritize vital functions, but some limited energy will go to other functions, but at the cost of your vital functions. So the solution, the kind of simplest solution, is to provide more energy. So you need the energy to cover the costs of running the kidneys, running the liver, running the digestive and reproductive organs. Because if you think about pain, you could live a lifetime with back pain and, live to meet your great-grandchildren. Your back pain is unlikely to actually kill you. It's not a life-threatening thing as much as it can be excruciating, it can ruin your life. You can still live, but if your heart stops working, you cannot live. So there are certain functions and certain organs that are going to be prioritized, and anything to do with musculoskeletal pain is generally going to be very low on the priority, on the totem pole of priority. So we need enough going in to cover all the costs. So that's the most simplistic way of looking at it. Is there enough going in to cover the costs? And if you're having issues, if you're dealing with chronic stress, any kind of health issues, chronic health issues, aside from like an acute infection or like a gunshot wound, something that catches you out of nowhere that you couldn't have prepared for, anything you have generally is because you don't have the resources, be it energy, be it vitamins, be it minerals, be it whatever. You don't have the sufficient building blocks and energy to meet that demand. So that's kind of your best case scenario. So everything is working fine, but you're just not providing enough. So that is kind of the fuel side of things. You're putting in the fuel, but you're just not putting in enough fuel. So that's one side of it. The second thing is that this is the more complex thing, the more individual thing, and it's your body needs the ability to convert fuel into energy. So it's not just enough, it's not necessarily enough to put in more fuel into the body, because maybe your body has an impaired ability to convert fuel into energy. So if you think of a car is obviously not the same as a human, but you can put fuel into the car, like into, the hole where the fuel goes in. I'm not a car person, so this is maybe not the best analogy, but you put fuel in the hole where the fuel goes, and something happens in the engine to convert that into energy, to convert that into moving the car forward or backwards. So that requires, whatever that requires in a car. In a human being, that requires efficient metabolism. It requires the proper conversion of fuel into energy. Now, the things that impair that ability, or basically stress impairs your ability to convert fuel into energy. And guess what? If you're in chronic pain, you are by definition dealing with some level of chronic stress. And guess what? If you're living the way most of us live in modern society, scrolling through social media, living in a city, doing a job that you don't absolutely love, having relationships that aren't perfect, that challenge you in some ways, which would be kind of a regular life for most of us, that likely means you're dealing with some level of chronic stress. And if you're eating the foods that most of us eat, or that most of us are even recommended to eat, these can cause stress and can impair your ability to convert fuel into energy. And the challenge with this is that the longer you've been doing this, so the longer, suppose you've been eating really unhealthy foods, industrial seed oils, any fried foods is usually fried in some sort of industrial seed oil. You've been eating just crap for, your lifetime, or for a significant portion of your lifetime. Alcohol, whatever it is, smoking, whatever it is, the longer you've been doing any of these things, the more likely it is that your ability to convert fuel into energy is impaired. So suppose you lived maybe a fairly average lifetime, you ate fried foods reasonably regularly, crisps, potato crisps, or chips you'd call them in America or in other places, potato chips, sweets or candy or whatever it is, and crappy foods. But maybe you're not going too overboard, but you're doing that, and maybe you smoke for a bit, and maybe you drink every now and then, maybe you had a few years there, 15 to 25, where you kind of went hard on the alcohol, whatever it is, you will have impaired your body's ability to convert fuel into energy. In all likelihood, maybe technically it's possible that you didn't, if you're taking certain mitigating steps. I don't know if that's possible, but suppose you've done that, you've lived a fairly average life, and now suddenly you decide, okay, I'm going to clean everything up, I'm going to have the perfect diet, the perfect movement, meditation, exercise routine, whatever it is, you're doing everything perfectly. It's likely that there's still going to need to be a time of healing, and that could be years. And the longer it's been, and depending on how strict you are, the longer it's going to take. So if you're not that strict with your new changes and you've been unhealthy for a very, very long time, it's going to take years, like it could be decades, to be perfectly honest, of restoring your body's ability to convert fuel into energy. And that's what I see with people with chronic pain issues who are essentially doing all the right things. They are doing their mobility. They've bought into the whole, life is yours to shape, and you need to take control of your health. They get that. They're all in on that, but they're not getting better. And it's because, and there could be something else, but it's likely because they're not putting in enough fuel into the body. So they're not just simply not meeting the demands for the cost of living life pain-free and optimally, or their body is still impaired and still unable to convert that fuel into energy, because in order for muscles to relax, in order for muscles to function properly, they need proper energy metabolism. They need to be able to relax, they need to be able to contract, and all of these things have an energetic cost. It takes energy. It actually takes energy to relax a muscle, which sounds stupid. You would think the same way you kind of think that sleeping, you should be able to just fall asleep. You should be able to just close your eyes and then be asleep because it's sleep. You kind of think of it as, I'm shutting things off. It should be easy. But sleep is extremely energy demanding. And muscle relaxation actually is energy demanding, because your muscles are constantly contracting to some degree. So muscle relaxation isn't so much a relaxation of a muscle as it is a decreased contraction of the muscle. So it's actually a very finely controlled muscle reaction that, again, if it's fine and it's detailed and it's nuanced, it requires a lot of energy. Whereas muscles being tight constantly is kind of like a handbrake in a car. That doesn't require much energy. It just locks on. Whereas muscles that are healthy and adaptable and can modulate, or they can vary their amount of contraction, their amount of relaxation, that requires energy. It requires proper energy flow in the body, and it requires efficient conversion of fuel into energy. So again, that is the food you put in, the food you consume, and the sunlight and the fresh air and everything. It's the ability for your body to actually use that. It's the ability of the car to actually turn the fuel, the gasoline, the whatever, the diesel, into motion, into combustion, or I hope I use that term properly. But yeah, the point is that it requires more energy, and we need to address that. And it's the thing that people don't seem to understand, because again, it's this issue of, well, I'm a physio and I do what physios do, and then when a problem kind of falls out, when what I'm doing doesn't solve the issue, then, well, I refer them out. And so you've got people in bubbles, you've got physios or chiros or whatever, who don't understand that their interventions are actually very superficial. I'm beginning to think that probably the most important important intervention for chronic pain is nutritional. And I feel like if you have chronic pain, the first thing you should be thinking is nutrition. But we don't think that. Like, who with chronic pain has immediately thought, yeah, I'm going to go to my nutritionist? They think physio, chiro, whatever, massage, and that's the industry. And part of that is because we live in this bubble, because we want to be a physio, we want to be an osteo. I'm a chiropractor. I believe chiropractic is the way, rather than pain is the common goal. And I will do anything and everything. I will learn whatever to resolve pain. I don't care. Like, I'm not trying to be a chiropractor. I'm not trying to be a physio. I'm not trying to be whatever. I don't care. I want to solve chronic pain by any means necessary. So if that is the common goal, if you recognize that, and if you have the ability to change your mind and to separate yourself from the emotion and look at things differently, and reevaluate things and change your mind, you will realize that, actually there's a lot more to it. And a lot of what we've been sold as the solution to pain is it's very superficial stuff. Like, when I initially got into this stuff, when I signed up to study physical therapy, I signed up for physical therapy with that course mostly because it's what was available to me at that time, given my schedule, because I was studying psychology at the time, so it's what I could fit. It wasn't so much about this is the better way to do it. I didn't have an allegiance to osteopathy or chiropractic, but I did also assume that, well, I want to treat pain, so obviously physical therapy or chiropractic or osteopathy or physiotherapy, one of those, they're what you do for pain. But no, it's the reality is that the more I learned about dealing with my own pain, the less it had to do with doing any of the interventions that I learned in college. It was not about a release of a muscle. It was not about a specific stretch. The most important thing for me, and it's not to say that those things don't have value, they do have value, but they're very low priority things. I found that when I addressed the energy deficit and my body's ability to convert fuel into energy and essentially address my overall health, that's what really dealt with the pain more than anything. Because, again, we recognize this ability of the body to self-heal, and you'll hear that from osteos, physios, whatever. They'll say, well, ultimately your body is doing the healing, I'm just kind of assisting it. And that's true, but there's also things that we could be doing that would really amplify that. So if we address the nutrition, if we address the lifestyle stuff, that it's far more valuable in most cases, of course, as there are individual differences and nuances. Again, we need to occupy that position of uncertainty and openness to different things. But I think we'd have a much better outcomes with issues of chronic pain and any chronic health issues if the public at large understood that nutrition should be the first port of call and lifestyle interventions should be the first port of call, and therapists pursued that and became skilled in that and became skilled in understanding the body's efficient conversion of fuel into energy and getting the body to heal itself properly, rather than, kind of doing that sort of on the side. Because what you have now are physios and chiros and whatever that get that, and they'll still do their thing, they'll still do their adjustment, they'll still give you the exercise or the stretch, and then they'll say, you gotta eat well, and you gotta sleep, and you gotta do this, but that's it. But really, that needs to be flipped. It needs to be, look, you need to eat this, or you need to figure out what you need to eat as an individual. You need to do all this. You need to essentially conduct experiments on yourself with nutrition, with lifestyle, and, by all means, move more, do this stretch could help, this self-release could help, whatever it is, but that needs to be flipped. So, I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there. And I kind of went into a topic that I wanted to discuss in a different video, but ultimately it's all connected, and we need to understand all of these things in context. But I think something we all need to undertake and just kind of take responsibility for is our ability to think, our ability to remain calm and objective and clear when we come up against differing ideas, differing perspectives, so that we can both just be healthier, so that we can not overreact, so that we can feel like we're not being driven crazy by people who disagree with us, but also so that we can actually get to meaningful solutions. Because I don't see any of this changing. Like, as an example, like Donald Trump was elected almost 4 years ago, and people, I wouldn't have voted for him, but I never saw the kind of, I never understood the irrational panic around him, because by that point I'd started adopting these things, and it's not to say that he doesn't have a lot of flaws, but anyway, but I thought, okay, this is going to force people to begin to kind of question things and begin to not be so dug into their teams. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to, just get better discourse for people to say, okay, this guy got elected. Why did he get elected? Why, if I think it's so clear that he's a monster, how did he get elected? What is it that I'm not seeing? What is it that these other people see? Why is it just that 51% or whatever of the country are just evil monsters? Is it just that they're idiots? What is it? And start to kind of chip away at that, and people come away from this process with better discourse, better ability to think. But we're kind of in the thick of it now, a couple of months away from another election, and I think my prediction is that he's going to win again, and I'm very concerned that people haven't learned anything, and they're just going to be outraged again and not understand why people voted for him. And we're not going to get anywhere. And people want to talk about, this needs to change, we need justice here, we need that, but they're not willing to reflect on their ability to think, which should be the most fundamental thing. Your ability to entertain ideas, to consider different things, to problem solve, and to come to an actual solution. People don't seem to be any better at doing that, at least at large. There are plenty of people who do this, but they're not really the people you hear from on the news. So at large, we don't seem to have evolved in any way, and we're back into, my team versus your team, and the amount of, Olympic level mental gymnastics that people will perform to not let him win, put in a guy with dementia who's, I would argue, a pedophile. But all of these things, at some point you need to be like, let's do better. Let's think better. Let's come up with better solutions, because this is a joke. And like I said, as this pertains to chronic pain, it's the same thing. People are in pain and they're like, I'm denouncing Western medicine and I'm going with blank. And blank could be Chinese medicine. It could be homeopathy. It could be this, that, and the other. And all they've done is they've just jumped ship to another team. They haven't inhabited the space of uncertainty, the space of change, the space of, real change, and the space of real movement towards the truth. They've just jumped to the other team and they're not thinking any better. They're just, it's the same level of effort, but it's just on that team and that aligns with them a bit more. And that's going to get you nowhere, because you need to be able to recognize the strengths and value of modern medicine, of certain medications, of certain industries, of certain interventions. And you need to recognize the value of other things. When is Chinese medicine valuable? When is homeopathy valuable? And just be able to entertain that. And again, inhabit that position of uncertainty and openness to new information and growth. And that ultimately requires the ability to convert fuel into energy, which is about eating the right foods. It's about reducing stress, offering the right nutrients and time and space for your body to heal, and its healing mechanisms to come back online, essentially. And that underpins chronic pain. It's the same issue. So, that's it. Bit of a long-winded rant, but happy with that. Any thoughts, any comments, any questions, let me know. Happy to be doing this again. I hope it wasn't too... I'm in my car. I'm in the park. I'm in Phoenix Park, next to a road, and there's cars driving by, and I hope... I don't know what the audio quality is going to be like, but... yeah, there you go. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in another episode.